Welcome everyone to Talking Back to Suicide. This is your host, Dr. Diane Kaufman, though I'd prefer to be called Diana for my creative self. I'm a poet, artist, retired child psychiatrist, and the founder director of the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention that uses the power of art to connect, express, and heal. And I'm so happy for you to meet our co-host, Kino Isaac, who's coming to us from South Africa. Kino is a DJ, music producer, entrepreneur, and a mental health advocate for independent artists. And our special guest today is Catherine Gursky, MBA, who has lived experience with PTSD, ADHD, depression, anxiety, addiction, and her own suicide attempt. Through therapy, medication, recovery, lifestyle change, and learning how to actively build hope, she transformed her life and has been sober for over 20 years. Catherine is, amazingly, the CEO and Chief Hope Officer of the Shine Hope Company, a global platform advancing hope as a measurable and teachable public health strategy. She's the author of the biggest little book about hope, host of the Hope Matrix podcast, and creator of the award-winning Hopeful Minds, Hopeful Cities, and Hopeful Mindsets programs that provide individuals, schools, workplaces, and communities practical skills to proactively manage hopelessness and move toward measurable hope. To honor her late father, John Gursky, a successful banker and engaged family man who died by suicide when Catherine was 18 years old and a freshman in college, Catherine founded in 2004 IFRED, the International Foundation for Research and Education on Depression. The purpose of IFRED was to rebrand mental health, advance prevention, and expand access to treatment through public awareness campaigns, celebrity engagement, brain science education, universal symbolism, and strengths-based narrative. That early work was the foundation of what later evolved into the Shine Hope Company. Catherine represents the World Federation for Mental Health at the United Nations, which was founded in 1948. The World Federation is the first global mental health organization and sets the annual theme for World Mental Health Day. In addition, she's a published author in peer-reviewed academic journals, and her mission is to ensure that every person understands what hopelessness is, recognizes it early, and knows how to strengthen hope in real time. So very warm welcome, Catherine. We are so delighted that you can join Talking Back to Suicide today.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. I so appreciate it and the work you all are doing.
Yes. So how do you define hope? What is it?
Great question. I know. So hope is basically, and there are different definitions for it. And in our programs, we have our kids come up with their own definitions, but it's really the belief the future can be better than today, and that or collectively, we have the power to make it so. So, it's thinking that things can get better and we can take action to get there. And so when I came up with my own definition of hope, I really came at it too from hopelessness. So wanting to understand what hopelessness was, and hopelessness is both emotional despair. So sadness, anger, fear, and then it's also a sense of helplessness. I can't do anything about it. So it's the collision of our emotional despair, those negative emotions, and I can't do anything. That's really what a moment of hopelessness is about. And so for me, getting to hope I saw two key ingredients of hope, really positive feelings. So we're feeling good, and then we're taking action. So we're taking inspired actions towards our goals. So that's really, there's a hope scale. You can measure hope, but that's
Yeah.
in essence what it is.
I saw that on your website, right? In terms of take the free hope inventory, and I printed it out, and I found it interesting the types of questions that were being asked, and I'll just read a couple of them out loud. So there were 12 items stated on the adult hope scale. And it starts off with, I can think of many ways to get out of a jam. I energetically pursue my goals. Then there was, I feel tired most of the time. Another one was, there are lots of ways around any problem. Going down the list, there was, I've been pretty successful in life. I usually find myself worrying. And the last one was, I meet the goals that I set for myself. And then there was a rating scale that went from 1 to 8, with the beginning being definitely false, not true, all the way up to definitely true. And I was surprised by the questions, right? It seemed as if the questions were about confidence in oneself.
Yeah, and the ability to create a better future. I'll say 4 of the questions out of those 12 are actually not scored. So okay. Interestingly enough, so there are only really 8 questions that are part of the hope scale, and they throw 4 in to kind of throw you off. A couple of those that you mentioned aren't part of it, but yeah, it's really about future orientation, right? Do we believe the future can be better? And then do we have the skills necessary to take us there? And we have to learn from our past experiences, and we have to believe the future can be better and that I can come up with solutions. Original Hope Science, C.R. Snyder developed these scales, and it was really about goals. So you have a goal for something, you have agency, so the ability to get there, and then you can create pathways so you can come up with solutions. In thinking about suicide, it's, your despair is very evident, and you don't feel like you have any power. And that's the collision of those two things. And so it's learning about how to manage our despair in healthier ways, and how to get out of helplessness and into action where our power actually is. But the scale, the Snyder Hope Scale has been around for a long time. And yeah, the traditional science, again, goals, agency, and pathways. My work brings in a lot of my work in mental health. Because that's a lot about despair, focusing on how do we navigate our despair in healthy ways. And to me, Hope Science has left out the equation and the importance of learning how to manage our despair, because my suicide attempt was not about being in a depression or, it was about a kind of collapse of my despair and then not knowing what to do and thinking that was the only solution, because my brain was in such a state of angst. And I call it like a brain attack. Like you have a heart attack. It was like attack of my brain. And I didn't know how to self-manage. And everything I was doing was escalating the state further and further and further, as opposed to de-escalating. And that is the stress response. And, traditional Hope Science doesn't teach you about the stress response. And so the framework that I developed and built is both on how do we manage our emotional despair in healthier ways, and how do we get out of helplessness and into action. And I think traditional Hope Science does a great job of getting out of helplessness and into action. And yet it's missing that really key ingredient of, if I'm not managing my stress response, like that's why I wasn't, which again, fear, sadness, anger leads to anxiety, leads to sadness, I think leads to depression. Anger leads to violence. My fear led to addictions. So it's just about really learning how to not run from my emotions, but to sit in them and to sit with them and to learn from them. But that is, it's definitely it's different than traditional hope science, but that is the Snyder validated hope scale. We use that with our programs because there's such evidence around if we can get you higher on your score, and unfortunately our youth are so low on their hope score right now. But if we can get you higher on the score, it's a protective factor for anxiety, depression, suicide, addiction. And so, I mean, my primary message is we're learning how to be hopeless right now. The world is training us to persistent states of hopelessness. It's about learning what it is, normalizing it, because we're actually all experiencing moments of hopelessness of every day. We're just not really conscious of what even hopelessness is, and then how we actually build skills to get to hope.
Now, the word depression, or someone saying, I am depressed, it's maybe there needs to be another word used, right? Or a differentiation of that word, because even if I say that word right now, I am depressed, it's like a full stop. It's like the end, right?
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like there's something very static about that word, which may in some way personify what one feels like, but that whole aspect of I'm helpless now, that's somehow different than I'm depressed. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, depression is more of a constant state, and I say I was just really bad at managing my sadness. I would be so sad and I would either turn to drugs or alcohol or something to fix it. Risky behaviors, all of these things help our sadness feel better in the moment, but they're just not healthy for us. And I focused on everything I couldn't control. So when you think of that helplessness part, like bringing my dad back or getting someone to do something I wanted, or I wish that person didn't break up with me, or all of the things that would keep me stuck in that state of sadness and helplessness, which then becomes persistent hopelessness, which then is what depression actually is. And so it's about learning, like every moment of every day, how are we managing our grief, our sadness? How are we managing our anger? And then how are we managing our fear? To me, it's learning how to do that in healthy ways. Like I developed an anxiety disorder and a panic attacks every time I would speak, but it was because I was taught that was what was happening to me. And that feels, again, static and a persistent state that I'll never be able to really resolve. But when I understood and got into the science of it, it's actually my fear response that's getting activated. And then every thought I'm thinking, activating that fear response even further, which then brings me into the state of panic. I am just activating that autonomic nervous system. And then I get to the point where I can't speak, because we know that when we're in that stress response, we are in what we call our downstairs brain. We don't have access to our frontal lobe and our ability to think clearly. And so we go further and further in our downstairs brain. We can't think at all. And then we don't make good decisions. We can't speak in public because we can't even access our thinking, and so I was self-perpetuating all of this because I didn't understand it and I didn't know. And that's why learning about hopelessness, studying it so deeply, and then understanding how I myself was creating these states and how I had to be really intentional about how I cultivated my hope. I mean, I was told I was at a very high risk of suicide. And I started my nonprofit and I thought, well, I'm going to quit drinking because I know exponentially my risk of suicide increases if I use substances. And then, I was learning from all of these global experts, and they were telling me 800 numbers, restricting access to means were kind of at the time, this was 20 years ago, primary methods of how they were teaching suicide prevention. And I thought, that's great for time of crisis. And for a lot of people, it can really help them. It wasn't going to help me. And I know it would not have saved my dad. And, unfortunately, my dad called a friend when he was in his state, and his friend wasn't available. But, we teach people that you've got to rely on other people to be there to help you get through it. And unfortunately, when you do that, you can also drive that sense of helplessness in the individual when they're in the state, because it further activates their stress response. So I had to learn where my power was, where my despair was and where my power was, and how to get really proactive. Um, when I knew those two methods kind of weren't enough for me, that's when I dove into literature about suicide. And I had success with my company and brand. I wanted a programmatic solution for suicide for myself, first and foremost, but really to teach kids around the world, because our kids are struggling so much. And I thought, if I had learned skills when I was a kid, my life would have been so much easier. And across literature reviews, hopelessness came up consistently. I mean, study after study after study. It wasn't depression, it wasn't anxiety, it was hopelessness. And then, so I was studying hopelessness, and I thought, we're all experiencing moments all the time. And when people say, like, I never imagined that person would take their life, it's because we all experience moments, and we're never taught about what these moments actually are and how to manage them in healthier ways, And so, yeah, I'm grateful to be talking to all of you and the work that you're doing in this space, and share what I know. It's so important. Like, we can always manage our despair. Like, that's the thing about hopelessness. I'm like, suicide is preventable because you can always manage your sadness, anger, fear. Those emotions don't stay forever, no matter what. Emotions move through us, and you can always get out of helplessness and into action. Like, it might be not exactly what you want. Like, a lot of people, they're going to a relationship, or they want to be in sports, and they have an injury or something happens. But it's about learning, where is my power in either this situation or what we call re-goaling, and how can I move forward, and claiming, like, taking our power back where we're able to, and it's just learning how to do that.
I'm thinking that, and I'm not sure if this still happens, but I hope it does, that in English classes, Emily Dickinson's poem, right, about hope, right?
Yeah.
That would be but hope never asked a crumb from me is the metaphor of the bird, right? Although I love the poem, and Emily Dickinson is one of my favorite poets, I kind of disagree with the poem. I think that hope does ask something from us, right? In terms of activating it and working on it. But that would be a wonderful opportunity to incorporate mental health and how to activate hope, and also to become aware of hope, right? Where is hope in my life, and how am I using and strengthening my hope? And as you were speaking, Catherine, I was thinking, oh, suicide prevention equals hope intervention. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And once kids learn this, then, I mean, you think of the word hope, and there's a book, Hope is Not a Strategy. It's in business, so it's been a hurdle. But there's someone in Deloitte that was at Deloitte that just came out with the book, Hope is the Strategy, because it's so important. But we think of hope in the abstract. And to me, hope felt very far away. I'm like, how do I get to hope? Like, how do I even cultivate hope? So I'm not saying it's easy. Hope takes work. It's not just, you're not just hopeful. It's like, you have to do the work every day. I created what I call the hope matrix. And it's like, despair is on one end and positive feelings are on the other, and helplessness is on the bottom, and then taking inspired action. So your high hope up here when you're taking inspired actions, feeling good, and in like the low hope when you're in despair and helplessness. It's just like work to move in the direction of hope. And it's work. Like, the more challenges we have, the more we have to use our skills. And it's oftentimes when we don't want to use our skills. And the interesting thing too, as it relates to that, is motivation. And we kind of think it's general, people generally think that, like, I'm going to be motivated to do something, so I'm going to, like, wake up and be motivated. But you actually don't become motivated until you actually start doing something. and then it clicks a reward cycle in your brain, and it feeds that motivation loop, and so you feel a little bit more motivated, and you have to keep taking steps, and then you become motivated. We think that we're going to be motivated first, so it kind of can stop us from doing anything. And that's why, like, getting out of that state of helplessness, like one thing, like doing one thing, like getting up and making your bed or getting up and brushing your teeth, that's why those single steps can be so helpful.
Catherine, you mentioned about suicide and hopelessness in youth, right? And as you know, suicide in the United States is the 11th leading cause of death. And for young people, it's the second leading cause of death, right? Even into young adults. Why is that? We know more now. There's more programming. There's people like you and all the work that you're doing in developing curriculums that are helpful. And yet suicide remains a tremendous tragedy, in the United States and across the world.
Can I just add to that question quickly? I just want to add something to what Anna said, because that was going to be one of the questions I was going to bring up. Over the last weekend, I had a conversation with my nephew, and he has just qualified as a psychiatrist, and he's a Gen Z, and he brought it up as a concern that Gen Zs are suffering so much with mental illness these days, and the suicide rate is on a rise, and he still can't put his mind around it. So it's a conversation that's happening all over, even with Gen Zs themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it needs to be happening because it's horrific. And when I do talks in schools, and I have kids take the Youth Hope Scale. It's a 6-question scale. And then I have them put what category they're in. And so we see on the screen, like where their hope is. And they're so low in hope. I mean, it's absolutely tragic. And the CDC in the US did a study, 57% of teen girls identify with persistent hopelessness. And like, you think of what a horrific job we're doing as adults educating our kids, because this is learned. Hopelessness is, it's learned, and we learn from leaders and from people modeling it. There are a couple of things that are driving this. One is, to me, they don't understand what hopelessness is. So once you start understanding what hopelessness is, and that you have power over your hope, and you've got to be protective of your hope, and then start learning what you have to do to protect yourself. So for instance, social media, we know that can drive a state of despair in youth and a sense of helplessness, because we don't have control over what other people are posting. We have very little control over what they're saying about us. And we can see it all the time. It can reinforce addictive habits and patterns with scrolling and whatnot. So that's one thing. Smartphones they train our brain, and especially as we're growing up, so developing brains in youth, it trains you to addiction by using intermittent reinforcement. So you don't get a notification all the time. It's sometimes you get one, sometimes you don't. And that trains us to be addictive, to be like always looking for that, because it's not constant reinforcement. It's called intermittent. And that's the highest way to get someone addicted to something very quickly. So they grew up with smartphones. So again, more addictive type brains, less attention span because of that, more impulsivity. And then you think about the 24/7 news cycle that's on all the time. And, news gets paid is monetized off our negative biases. So, as we're constantly searching for threats in our environment, so we're looking for these threats. And so that's why all the news headlines are about threats. What is that about? And so it trains your brain to that negative threat state all the time, which increases our stress hormones. That creates disease. And we're just kind of unconscious about a lot of this. And then not protective about it. Not protective. We have a program for teens, and they're like, don't come to us and tell us, well, first of all, don't deliver the program to us. We'll deliver it with each other. So it's a peer-to-peer model of teaching hope. It's a book, and they do it. There's 12 lessons, and they do it with each other in groups as opposed to us teaching them. And they also said, you tell us all of these things like social media, like don't use it, but don't tell, like you're using it. So give us information, pros and cons. And so that's what we do in our program. We let them explore it for themselves and think about, how does it make me feel? Am I feeling good? Am I feeling bad? A lot of science behind why they're doing things like scrolling. Like if you're in a state of despair, all of those addictive patterns produce dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins, things we want and crave and need. Who knew violence does that for us? Well, now we know. And so it's about teaching kids, you're just trying to feel better. And here are healthier strategies for getting your dopamine, your serotonin. And Andrew Huberman just did a podcast about if you're getting your dopamine, your oxytocin, your serotonin, your endorphins with no effort, then you're not getting healthy. We call it you're not getting a healthy dose. We call the happy hormones doses. It takes work to generate healthy happiness hormones. So you actually have to do something and then you get a reward. But if you're just getting it immediately, compulsive spending, gambling, addictive practices, risky behaviors, that'll give you that immediate release, but it's not healthy for you in the long term. So those are some of the things. Global warming, when you think about, our kids think the world is ending. And so when you think about that despair, you're going to be in that sadness, anger, fear, and helpless to do anything about it, because it's like the whole world that feels very big. Some of the problems feel so big, but it's really about teaching these youth, how do we manage our emotions about it? Because to me, the fact that they're emotional about it is so important. And that shows me how deeply they care about all of this stuff. And if they can use their sadness, anger, fear to innovate solutions, to create solutions, get out of helplessness, like what do I care the most about? And then where is my power in that? How can I use why I'm on this earth to create change in that very space? I think it's so important, and it's important that we teach them. And, one of the biggest challenges, and I'm a branding and business person by training, and I had a psych undergrad degree, but it's creating, because we have so many programs that send so many different messages and so many different strategies, it can become really overwhelming. And that's why I went to prove out my theory, and then I created a company a few years ago. And to me, I want a brand that I just reinforce. Trying is what you need to be doing every day. It's across, we have a public health campaign. The SHINE framework is in our youth programs, our teen, our college course, our veteran program, our workplace, with consistent language that everyone can use and repeat and work on together. And so, to me, branding, like we need to see something so many times for us to even start understanding it and practicing it. And then there are a lot of things that do, there's an app, but there's no in-person learning or programming. And to me, it's important that we don't rely solely on technology to fix this, and we don't rely solely on in-person programs to fix this, but that it's a combination of strategies. So yeah, the youth stats break my heart. And to me, the really positive thing is once kids learn, oh, I've learned to be hopeless, and these are the outcomes of that, and oh, I can learn to be hopeful. They're conditioned, like some of their environments, they're just conditioned to despair and helplessness. And then once you give them the skills, it's transformative. So that to me is the most hopeful thing of all of this. I spent so much of my life not understanding that I had any control over my hope, and that I could actually learn to cultivate and be more hopeful. And, the approach we use blends spiritual practices in with science. So, whatever kind of faith or no faith that you have, we know that prayer is a really good stress skill, and it is really effective at helping to reduce our stress response. So, a lot of people think of hope in terms of religion, but we have with our veteran program, it's, you know, being used in the VA, and it's clergy that are developing it that are implementing it with veterans. Like, you know, the faith isn't enough. Like, we need to know why we keep doing the things we're doing, and the physiological reason, the biological reason, so that we can stop. You know, a lot of our youth said, you know, there's so much shame around, I don't get why I keep doing the same thing. And once they understand, oh, it's because I'm in my downstairs brain and I can't think clearly, like, that's what, you know, and then they start supporting each other. We did a program with youth in prison, and then they start supporting each other. You're in your downstairs brain, like, don't, you know, take a step back, like you're flipping your lid, and then they don't further escalate each other, but instead help with strategies to de-escalate. It's transformative for them. So, you know, it's tragic what's happening, and yet I have a lot of hope in knowing what I know, and knowing that if we can operationalize this with youth, like, they get it pretty quickly when you teach them.
Catherine, you mentioned in your growing up that you hadn't learned about managing, you know, your emotions, amplifying your hope. What were the negative lessons that you were being taught, maybe inadvertently, you know, within the family or the school system or peer group, that led to what you just said before about not learning those skills?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was an addict at a very young age. So I've been in recovery over 21 years now. And I mean, I used substances, you know, when I was probably in 5th grade, 6th grade, when I first started drinking. I mean, I look at my nieces now and I think, oh my God, like, I was drinking gin, straight gin, you know? So I mean, I was so uncomfortable with it. Like, I was such a sensitive kid, and my dad had a lot, like, I was very close with my dad. So we had an incredible relationship. He was such a family. It was so celebratory. It was really, and he had a really bad anger. You know, he could not control. He went from 0 to like 1,000 immediately. And he, you know, he's likely from his own trauma. And, you know, until we learn how to navigate our anger, work on our trauma, all of those things, it just, that also continues down generations. And so he was an alcoholic, and had grandparents that were alcoholics. So, you know, I was smoking, I was like doing, I mean, just all the things you shouldn't be doing, because I was trying to feel better and I had no idea how to do so. And I didn't understand how damaging they were for me. And I wasn't modeled healthy ways to cope and manage what I was feeling. And so, and, you know, I have an incredibly addictive brain. Like, I can create a neural pathway in a second to an addiction, you know, and then I want that. Like, and so I would go from I'd stop one addiction, and then I would move to another addiction that I would just replace it with. And so to me, it wasn't until I got, you know, to the underlying cause of all of the stuff. Like, I really think all of it, the ADHD, the PTSD, the anxiety, the depression, the suicide attempts, all stemmed from like my moments of hopelessness. So that despair, yeah, I wasn't managing my fear, anger, sadness in healthy ways. And I was so focused on other things or other people, or, you know, and I wasn't knowing where my power was and how to use that power in a way that was healthy for me. So yeah, I mean, it, you know, just it would have been really transformative. And then, you know, one of the things a youth said to me, we did work in Northern Ireland where I studied our programs initially. And he said, you know, I notice now, not just when I'm in my downstairs brain, but like, I got in the car with my brother and I noticed my brother, he was agitated. I'm like, he was in his downstairs brain. And normally I would, like, you know, get in there and start debating with him, and it would escalate. It would be this big fight, this blow up. It would ruin the night. And he said, I didn't. And instead I just kind of took a step back and let him, you know, didn't say anything. And then he said in the next morning, woke up and he was fine. Like, you know, that's what it looks like to understand and have compassion for other people, and that other people are in their downstairs brain. And you know, I was constantly trying to intervene with my dad, and I did not do so effectively, I often made it a lot worse, unintentionally. But once you understand that people can think clearly when they're in that state, you can see it in people's eyes, and then learning how to, if I could have learned how to self-manage myself, my own way through that, so I wasn't so activated by his activation, it would have been really helpful for me.
Were there discrete warning signs, and you might want to mention what warning signs can be, to your father's suicide?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard to say what warnings are. Like I'm very cautious of that, because I think anyone can die by, like, if they don't understand this, and that's why I think suicide prevention includes teaching everyone about hopelessness and ensuring everyone knows what a suicidal state looks like. I mean, it's like CPR, but it's for the brain. So, I mean, there are a lot of, like, he talked about suicide. He was hospitalized for a point, but then he got out and said he was fine and he wasn't thinking about it. So, I mean, people can talk about suicide. It's hard to know at what point they will actually do it. One thing, he was released from the hospital and he was alone in the house, which is, and he had gotten let out early, which, people shouldn't be alone when they're in that state. And yet you also have to know that they have to be able to talk to you. Like I always say, suicide prevention is like about ourselves. Like we're the only ones that can prevent our own suicide. Nobody can prevent our suicide. Like you cannot prevent someone. Like you can give support and tools and do your best, but ultimately it's an individual's, and we want to get people in safe places when they're in that state. But you can learn to de-escalate your brain. There was no warning signs for me when I tried to take my life. It was like I was out partying and it was a random comment from a random guy and like sent me into a state. And nobody knew for 10 years that I'd even tried to take my life. I felt so much shame about it, and thought, how could my dad have done that to me? And I realized in that moment, it's not something that you do to other people. It's something you're trying to figure out for yourself. How do I navigate that state? Kevin Hines and through researchers also that have studied this, we know people don't want to die from suicide. The first thing, Kevin Hines is an activist now, and he talks about his attempt off the Golden Gate Bridge. And the first thing he thought when he let go of the railing was, I wish I didn't do that. The first thing he lets go and he goes, I wish I didn't do that. And, I believe that's true of everyone. We don't want to die. We want our hopelessness to end. So to me, suicide prevention is teaching about suicidal ideations, not as you want to die. It's you want your hopelessness to end. And here's the thing about hopelessness. You can always, again, manage your despair and get to feeling better. And you can always get out of helplessness into action. And so I still have suicidal ideations. Like I have challenges in my life, and my brain can go from like 0 to like, I gotta end it all really quickly as a solution. And it's just a neural pathway that's been built, I suppose. And so I have to intervene. Okay, what are you experiencing hopelessness about? And sometimes it's one thing, and sometimes it's like 50 things. And I'm like, okay, let's narrow back down to one thing, one thing at a time. What are you going to do about your sadness, anger, fear? And I use my skills and, okay, how are you going out of helplessness? Where is your power? Like, what should you be working on? To me, it's just an alarm system in the brain saying, like, we're not paying attention to something. We've got to pay attention to this thing, whether it's finances or a relationship or, grades or any of that. But like, there's nothing worth dying for. Like, I think like back to, oh my God, if I had been successful and I had told myself over that person, that comment, like, there's nothing. It seems big in the moment. Everything seems, but like we can do amazing things with the knowledge, with learning from from our emotions instead of acting in harmful ways to ourselves or to other people.
How receptive have the schools been to your outreach and the other settings where you brought the program?
Yeah, pretty good. I mean, it's, you know, it's not easy to teach the world how to be hopeful. So what I initially did is I had another company, the Mood Factory, and the nonprofit. I know you mentioned International Foundation for Research and Education on Depression. We recently rebranded to Hope. So I crossed out depression and I put hope because now I'm obsessed with hope. Like, how do we get to hope? And I found that from understanding depression and then understanding hopelessness. But we started with young kids, and I proved out the theory that you could teach hope to young kids. We studied it in Northern Ireland and Malaysia and Suriname, did some research, did some work in Chicago. So it's been, you know, I think downloaded over 6,000 times or something, our program for young kids. And now it's been about operationalizing it at scale. So I've spent the last several years building a company and brand around it, creating programming now for all ages. We have a public health campaign, so now we're starting to activate cities on Hope, licensing our framework to cities. They do a public health campaign and then have access to these resources. We got an International Day of Hope passed at the United Nations last year, so July 12th is the International Day of Hope, and, you know, encourage anyone to get engaged. So I think it's, you know, once we get over our preconceptions about what hope even is, it was very hard for me to raise money from a nonprofit. I'm not a nonprofit. Like, you know, I did it because I cared deeply for it, but I'm a business person by training and trade, and so people didn't want to invest in prevention. They didn't want to, like, I was like, teach them hope, and they're like, well, why? We've got, like, you know, these crises. And we know that we spend the majority of our mental health funding globally on, you know, crisis services. And that's really the most expensive time to address an issue. And so they didn't, you know, there's no return on investment if you invest in hope. So I started a company. I'm like, I got to build a global brand about this. I think this is the most important thing I can be doing. So I put my other company, it's kind of to the side right now. And you know, focusing on how you operationalize it. So we have an app, we license our programs to cities, and you know, I give the programming away at no cost to anyone that needs it and that wants it really, but to, you know, but yeah, we're trying to, and we got Chicago, we got Reno, we're just launching Napa, California. We now have a Hopeful Cities Ambassador program that we're about to launch in the next few days that I think is going to be really great. We're going to do something similar for the International Day of Hope. I do the International Day of Hope through my nonprofit and the nonprofit work that I do. But yeah, I mean, we're making progress, you know. I want everyone taught everyone in the world yesterday. So it's not fast enough for I'm doing what I can with the resources I have.
Tina, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is powerful. This is really powerful. Catherine, early on the show, you mentioned hope that the future can be better. Now, I'm a person that believes there's more beauty in the world. You know, there's more good in the world than there is bad. And you brought up the media. The thing is that our brains get navigated to the media that's just showing us all the chaos that's happening in the world. And we all get consumed by it, no matter which corner in the world that we're actually coming from. What do you see, or what you got hope in the future to come? What do you see that millions of people around the world doesn't see?
Well, and I love that you brought that up. And I think it's really important. We have to train ourselves to these, right? You have to train yourself because it's easy to just see, and our brain is wired to see everything that's bad. And it's not about just being positive because that's toxic for ourselves, right? It's not about just being happy, being positive. It's about learning about our emotions and understanding what our sadness is about, what our fear is about, what our anger is about, what our, you know, that rage. And then using those emotions in positive ways for why we're here, how we use it to fuel our purpose, our passion, what we care about in life. And it's a process. Like, you're not just going to be happy. You're going to like dive into your sadness, and you're going to understand, what is my sadness telling me? And then what can I do about it? Where is my power in this? So, to me, there is, because these kids are so high in their emotional states, they're so sensitive and they're so passionate about all of this. If we can teach them how to channel these emotions in healthier ways and turn that to teach them the science and the skills to do so. Because when it was escaping my emotions for so long that just damaged me, didn't get me anywhere in life. But it was when I started diving into my emotions and what I learning about what I cared so deeply for, that my brain actually created new solutions to the problems that I felt so deeply about. But it wasn't until I really got into the emotional state of it and was like asking for answers, for guidance, whether you are believe in God or pray, turning it over to the universe and saying, like, help me like see clearly what my role is and what I can do about this, because I care so much about it. So, right now kids are learning, like, it means you have depression. It means you have anxiety. There's something wrong with you. You're not going to get better, or you're going to have this problem forever. And it's not a good thing. And, we numb it away. I think, to me, it's learning how to, transfer I work with young kids in recovery, or they're young kids in my eyes, 20s. I think, oh my gosh, for a 20-year-old to get sober, like, how much amazing work they're going to be able to do in the world. Because if you have that addictive tendency, like, you feel so intensely and so passionately, and when you're taught to redirect that energy to drive change in the world, it's transformative. And my greatest ideas have come not from running from my sadness, but from, like, God being in that and releasing it, that emotional charge, and then going, what am I to learn? Like, what can I do with this? And that's how, it's been 15 years of this hope work, but I'm finally at a place now where I'm like, I got it. I know what the challenge is and what we have to be doing about it. And I have, the solutions, but it's been a lot of deep inner work in the process. But, kids our kids are like, they're so passionate, they feel so deeply. And so to me, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Behind you, it says #ShineHope. What's the most basic thing that we can do each and every single day to shine hope as humans?
I love it. Well, nothing's basic, I gotta tell you. No, I'm just kidding. It's all like, it's a simple construct. Okay, so shine, I'll just quick say, stress skills, how you identify and manage your stress response. And I'll get to the single thing too, but happiness habits, how we cultivate our happiness hormones in healthy ways versus unhealthy ways. Like, we got to understand them both. Inspired action, so how we can actually set a goal, take a step, create new goals, new pathways. So it's kind of understanding that. Nourishing networks, so how we cultivate healthy bi-directional networks with other people and also with ourselves, super importantly. And then eliminating challenges, understanding how our brain works and how it's like kind of programmed to create problems for us. Things like rumination, internalizing failure, worry. All of these things are things that our brain does automatically, that until we become conscious and aware of it and learn strategies to intercept so that we stop doing them, like, we just keep doing them out of no awareness. So, if we could get everyone in the world understanding the 90-second stress response, and this is a stress skill, so that we have a 90-second physiological response to triggers where our body gets flooded with adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, and we can't think clearly. Like, we can't make good decisions. So if we could get everyone to pause 90 seconds before reacting to something, it would save us a lot of damage. Reacting to ourselves or to others. That's when addictive things. That's when violence happens. That's when all of those things happen. So that stress skill is important. And then also, you can create your own happiness hormones. So if you wake up in a funk, think about, okay, the most important thing I need to do is get some dopamine, some oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, again, in healthy ways. So what are things like going for a walk or going to the gym, or, there's all kinds of laughter, videos, so we want to think of our body like a machine that can create, it's all within us, how do we do that? But, if you pop a pill, you could get it immediately, but what work could I do? And it feels good to do the work. So, and the more challenges you have, the more you have to shine. So the more you have to do the skills, practice them. And it's learning that. And then, so the 90 seconds, so I'll give you 3. 90-second stress response, happy hormones in healthy ways, and be kind to yourself. Like we talk about being kind to others, but like be forgiving of yourself, be compassionate towards yourself, give yourself some love. It's so important. That good, like we people, we say about how people talk to other people, but if we could hear how everyone talks to themselves, and it does damage, we know that it's really harmful when we talk to ourselves that way. So that's really important too.
Yeah.
Catherine, when a person.
So this is one more thing, when Captain is talking about loving yourself, I developed this habit that if I can look at a person and tell them I love you, I can also go in front of the mirror and say, Kino, I love you. So that's what I do often.
I love that. And yeah, we should be doing that every time we look in the mirror.
Yeah, Kino, I love you. Kino, I believe in you.
Yeah.
Kino, you can do it.
So important. Belief is so important.
Catherine, what would you say to someone who is saying, well, I can't tolerate staying with my emotions. It's too uncomfortable. And don't you understand, that's why I'm doing all the things I'm doing to avoid and escape my feelings. And you're telling me to stay with my feelings. But how do I do that? What are some coping strategies or ways that, quote, the window of tolerance can get bigger, even little by little?
Yeah, step by step, day by day. And that's the beautiful thing is it can get bigger and you can learn to sit with your emotions. Running for my emotions created all the problems in my life, quite honestly. Running, not addressing any of them, not sitting with them. So to me, I learned to sit in meditation with group I did it in a group setting because I was like, I can't meditate and I didn't think I could meditate. And it helped me to do it in group meditation. Find things that work for you for managing your emotions. There's some research that venting actually strengthens anger. So we think venting is often like a great coping mechanism for anger, but it actually can elevate your anger, we know now. And so doing things like meditation or going out for a walk or it's about how do we de-escalate that anger state? And then again, listen, what is our anger telling us? I used to think my sadness would kill me. And that if I sat in the grief that I felt about losing my dad and, growing up and not being able to help him in the way that I wanted to, and him not being here for my whole life, I was like I will die from that sadness. And, you don't, you die if you avoid the sadness. Like that's the road it takes you down. And so, and do it in a safe place, go to therapy and do it with a therapist if you need. I used to go with wild horses, I'd be around animals, I'd go to the beach, swim, but like do things that help you. Like everyone's going to have their own strategies. We have a list of all, a number of stress skills, what really does help us manage our stress hormones. And everyone has different things that work for them. So some it could be talking to God. For others, I don't believe in God, but like find what works for you. And it is hard. Like, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not going to tell you it's easy. It makes sense that you don't want to do it and then that it feels hard. I'm just telling you, And I always tell people, like, I can't make you hopeful, but I can teach you how to hope. And, you know, what you do with that is up to you. Like, I can't make you do the things, and I can't, you know, it's like all going to be up to you, but I can at least give you the skills. And to me, that's my role. You know, I keep myself in a state of hopelessness. If I'm focused on, you know, teaching everyone this, I can only do what I can do, or, you know, losing people to addiction. And, you know, to me, until we have a whole society approach, until we're teaching our kids young, like, we're not going to solve violence until we teach our kids about the stress response, the 90-second response, as well as do the things that are systemic, that cultivate hopelessness. You know, to me, I always say it's not an either or, it's a both. But I grew up in a place where I thought I had very limited power, and I had a lot more power. I just wasn't aware of it or how to use it. And so it's important to me to ensure people know how to do that.
I recently gave a presentation at a middle school here in Oregon, Tuolumne Middle School. It was called Holding On for Hope and Healing. And I remember one thing, one of the slides and things that I talked about was very similar to what you said earlier. I was using the word resilience in terms of, like, we can learn resilience, right? It's a skill and we practice it. But then I said, vis-a-vis what you shared, that we can also learn unhealthy skills and practice not being resilient. And that's so important to know. And I guess that comes with that self-awareness, right? Being able to step back, right? To witness it, right? What am I doing and why? And what is the outcome? And what else can I do? And what do I want to happen, right? What is my goal for myself? And I also like what you talked about earlier, with a brain attack. A while ago, I had written an essay which was called If My Words Could Make a Difference. And it was after a young adult had told me about a very serious suicide attempt that would have killed her, that she had been thinking of doing, but thankfully had not. But she only told me this years after it had actually happened. And while I was grateful she told me now, I wondered why she hadn't told me years ago as her psychiatrist. She told me, she didn't tell me because, quote, I thought you'd take it seriously. And of course, I would have. And the essay that I wrote, just to get my feelings out, was called If My Words Could Make a Difference. Meaning, if what I would tell you would really help and you listen and act on it. And the first line was, if I was having a heart attack, would I call myself crazy or would I call 911? And talking about how mental health and physical health are all in one. And then I used that, the metaphor, but also the reality of heart attack and brain attack. Okay, just as you were talking about.
I love that. Yeah. And I mean, you bring up a great thing, writing. Writing has been cathartic for me. It's been so helpful for me in terms of, like, understanding what I can do next. Like, I wrote a book because I was so frustrated with the world not understanding. So I wrote a book about it, you know, to get my word out that way. And it was so helpful for me, like, you know, and that's what we're constantly doing, like processing and sharing what we know and using that to help others.
In your HOPE curriculums, do you utilize the expressive arts also in what you share?
Yeah, it's an amazing happiness habit, or stress skill. I mean, musical instruments, drawing, writing, singing, dancing, if you consider that expressive arts. But yeah, anything artistic, anything creative is a great way to cultivate our happy hormones. We get our, you know, that's what I mean. Like, doing those things is such a healthier way to navigate our way through what we're feeling than going and smoking a cigarette or picking up a bottle of, you know, because that'll make you feel better. Like, to me, first time I drank, I was like, oh my God, I feel amazing. And, you know, I was talking recently, I going through my amends, you know, after 20 years of using substances, and like, I always thought it made me feel better and it made my life better. And I really didn't believe like it was that big of a problem. And nothing crazy happened. I just started my nonprofit and I'm like, I better get really serious because I learned what alcohol does to the brain. And I got really clear that all substances made me a much worse person. You know, I just not helpful at all. And I was using them because I thought they made me feel good, but they don't make you feel good. And then they create that cycle of shame because you do all these things that you wouldn't normally do if you were connected to your divine self.
There's a poem I thought of that applies to a lot of what you shared. It's the poem "The Guest House" by Rumi. Do you know
I
that?
love that poem. Yeah, so good.
Right. In terms of all the emotions, right, that are visiting us, and to acknowledge them, welcome them. Not that we are necessarily happy that they're there, but they each have understanding to offer us.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's like sharing with other people too. I mean, in my close relationships, I start to share with them, this is what triggers me, and this is like, so if I'm doing this, like help me navigate this in healthier ways, because I don't want to be unhealthy in my interactions with people. And so when you create safe spaces, and we all have triggers, we all have a stress response. Everybody's navigating their sadness, anger, fear, and you know, the more adverse childhood experiences you have, the shorter your fuse, and likely the more you can potentially escalate. So the more work you have to do, unfortunately. And yet I also think the more passion and energy you have to create change, but creating an environment where we're compassionate and open with each other about what those triggers are and how people can better help us navigate our way through them is really important.
How can our listeners learn more about your HOPE activities?
Well, the Shine Hope Company is the company website. The International Day of Hope is a website we have, July 12th. So if you want to help us activate hope around the world, we'll have a 20-minute activation. It's free. We use the sunflower as the international symbol of hope that we plant all over the world. And I'm very active globally. I have been since I started this work. Hope is a universal construct. It can be understood in different cultures and different contexts. You know, we all want a better future, and we all want to believe that we have a role in making it so. But we also need to be taught skills to do that. And so, yeah, those two websites are great. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on social media, Catherine Getzke, KATHRYN, and then GOETZKE. And yeah, I love connecting with people on this. And you know, I want people to stick around. You know, the people we lose are the people that care so much, right? And they don't want to hurt other people or be a burden. And there's so much power when you dive into the emotions, like the intensity of emotions you feel in relationships and about what's happening in the world. And everyone has a very vital role to play. So there's nothing worth taking your life over, ever. There's nothing that anyone can tell me that I'm like, that's worth it's, you know, we're all on a journey, and it's all about navigating that journey and sticking around and learning, and then teaching what you've learned from the experience.
And if someone's listening right now that says, I have no hope, or my only hope is a negative one, which is things are going to get worse, what would you say to that person?
I would just say you don't know how to hope. And so learn how to hope, and then you can start building it.
Yes. Yes, and that they can. Yeah. Thank you so much, Catherine, for joining us today. Right. Really, I feel inspired.
Oh, good. Thank you both so much. And thanks for all the wonderful, important work you're doing in the world. I'm so grateful.
Bye, Catherine.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Thanks
Catherine.
for listening in. Bye-bye.